All right, thumbs up if you can see the screen and life is good. You can hear me okay? Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for coming tonight. So like Shannon said, the title of my presentation tonight is Local View from 4'2", same as my column in the Lake County Press. So tonight we're just going to talk about my leadership journey and why representation matters. So who in the world am I? And most of you on here know me, but maybe you don't know some of my story, and you probably know other parts of my story, but we won't talk about some of those parts. So as Shannon shared, I am a Two Harbors native. And so I grew up typically as a tomboy, hanging out with dad, hanging out with my older brother. This is my actual cousin. I thought he was the coolest thing next to sliced bread when I was growing up because he got to drive a three-wheeler and play with sparklers. I loved being outside, fishing and doing all those kinds of things. I'm the baby of 4 in my family by a lot. So I have much older siblings, 12, 15, and 16 years older than me. So it was a great way to grow up. I became disabled at age 7. I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis back on February 25th, 1988. So I just celebrated my 35th anniversary of my diagnosis date. And by age 8, I was in a wheelchair. So this is a picture of me in 3rd grade up at one of the local lakes doing tree planting. And so that was one of my first wheelchairs, and being able to be outside and be with my peers. And then I did a lot of youth leadership as I was growing up, whether it was being the lead trumpet player for our high school band and jazz band, whether it was leading our youth group at church, and music just became a passion of mine. And so by my sophomore year of high school, I knew that I wanted to become a junior high band director. And I had an amazing teacher that inspired me into that career path. And so I went to UMD and I got my bachelor's degree from there. And back in 2006, I was called back to Two Harbors after living in Duluth for my bachelor's and my first teaching job at Holy Rosary School. And then I have been an employee at 381 since 2006, working between Two Harbors High School, Minnehaha, and Silver Bay. I'm a dual certified K-12 instrumental and vocal music teacher. So that was a great time. So in my growing up, I was the shy, quiet wallflower. And I didn't really want to have any of that knowledge, but I always found myself in those positions of leadership or people expecting other things out of me. And so these are 2 of my medical team, and they saw things in me back in 2016 that they wanted to exemplify. So they nominated me for the, I have to think of all my correct terms, for the Journey Award through the Miller DeWan Foundation. And so that was kind of a really big pivotal point in my leadership life. And so I've always had to self-advocate from a very young age. But it's really hard when you're facing all those medical things to fight the fight for others at the same time that you're fighting your own medical things or fighting the fight of your own systems and your own care. And so it's been great to have these 2 providers be a part of my life for many decades and just be a pivotal part in my journey. And so then seeing what they saw in me was just really cool. And so by that winning of the Journey Award, a few months later, Two Harbors was selected to host the Blandin Community Leadership Program. And so this was, I think, like the 4th or 5th cohort that Two Harbors had won through the Blandin Foundation. And that is out in Grand Rapids. And so I had the privilege of being an alternate, and I was actually called up to serve, to go to this week-long retreat and do 4 additional trainings. And so with that, you can see at the bottom, it's a huge family, and our leaders were just amazed at how we became so close and tight knit. And these trainers that had done this for decades were just like, wow, you guys have something really, really special. And so it's just been a great family to be a part of. It is a little bittersweet tonight presenting this because our leader that you see in the picture I just put up recently just passed away. And so to Mary Jo, a lot is given, and a legacy that she has given to us as a leadership team here in Two Harbors, as well as throughout all of Minnesota and all the different people she has worked with. And the logo of the Blandin Foundation is a white pine. And so when you graduate from this program, you are given a lapel pin. And so you can find other Blandin alum throughout the whole state when we wear our pins, you know, out and about in community. And the whole reason that that is chosen is because a white pine, if I'm remembering correctly, will only give off its seeds when the pine cones are burned. And so only natural fire or fires will give that. And so it's a very representative mission for leadership, because anybody that's ever been in some kind of leadership knows that there is always some kind of fire that happens. You're tried by fire. And that's when you really learn about your character and your integrity and all the things that you have been learning because you need to apply them. And so this is just a great program. Two Harbors was also selected, and I believe Silver Bay was selected as well, but it happened during the pandemic time. And so like all other foundations and the rest of the world, different things, different programming has happened. And so I really hope that they come back to this type of model or this type of program, because Blandin Foundation has just been a huge asset to our small communities and rural communities statewide, but especially here on the shore. And the cool thing about this group of 26 on the bottom is that it was really them and their questions of curiosity and their encouragement of me getting back into advocacy, where I know I wouldn't be where I am today without this experience and without that support. And so they immediately came back to our community and were like, hey, we had Winter Frolic. How can we make this more accessible? Hey, we're in charge of Chocolate. How do we make this more accessible? Hey, I'm a county commissioner. How can we do X, Y, Z? So yeah, it's just been amazing. We have phenomenal people in our communities. So it was about a year after being a Blandin alum that Tony Sertich from the Northland Foundation had gotten a hold of me, and we had said, hey, what do you think about applying to become a Bush Fellow? And I'm like, what in the world is a Bush Fellow? And what is the Bush Foundation? And the Bush Foundation takes care of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the 23 tribal nations that are represented within those geographical areas. And so a Bush Fellowship is where you apply and you go through this very lengthy process. So the fellowship portal opens in August. The current questions are already out there on the web. They don't hide anything in their process. And it's a very intense and self-reflective time. And it's just amazing to go through that process, even if you're not selected as a fellow. It's just an amazing, deep questions to ask yourself. And so I was blessed to be connected with 2 other Bush Fellows. And once you're a fellow, you're always a fellow. So it was great learning from Lori and Sue, who had been through it before, and just getting their encouragement and having people to ask about the process. And so once you submit your questions in September, then you wait for a couple months, and then you find out November if you're a quarterfinalist, and then you wait a couple months, and then you find out that you're a semifinalist, and then you wait for a couple months, then you find out that you're a finalist. And then it gets really real, because then you have to have an interview with one of the Bush Fellow or Bush Foundation employees. And you just go through a whole list of things, which is amazing, but every single layer of questions get deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's just very transformational. So by the time I was a finalist and then had to wait to find out if I actually was selected, it was sitting on pins and needles. And to be honest, because the process was so long, I kind of forgot about it for a couple of weeks, because some of you guys that are educators on the call know that spring is really crazy and busy. So I kind of forgot about it a little bit. But then the hard part is that once you're a finalist, they'll tell you you were selected, but then you can't tell anyone. And so they have the caveat, if you're married, you can tell your spouse or your children, and that's not me. So I worked it out with a few of my close friends and my sisters, and I just said, if I'm selected, you'll get a certain text. That was my text. Because then I couldn't tell them, but they knew. All right. And Bush's Baked Beans has nothing to do with the Bush Foundation, but that was just my way of expressing that. So then I had to wait for a month, but during that month is when you're doing all of like the interviews with a PR company, you're prepping all of your interviews and all the different things you're going to say as a new Bush Fellow. You're getting new headshots if it wasn't pandemic. So we had our headshots that we submitted and they kind of gave them to a graphic artist that turned them into something different. So when you look at the website of the Bush Fellowship, you'll see that our year just looks a little different than everybody else, but it was because of the pandemic was new. And so that was really a hard part about the fellowship, because I went through the self-reflection and I went through that whole process, and the taglines for the Bush Fellowship is think bigger, think differently. So remember that little kid on the back of the three-wheeler that liked to be the wallflower, that didn't want to be the center of attention, that didn't want to fully engage, that didn't want to be leading people per se, was now out there. And it was surreal, and it was hard to think bigger and think differently. As somebody who had been in a wheelchair at that time for 30 some years, I wanted to go see the world, but I've never ridden on a plane. And for those of you that have been seeing some of the recent news and all of the advocacy that's been happening around this, every time somebody in a wheelchair takes a flight, they are taking a risk that their wheelchair is going to be completely damaged, and the airline can choose to repair that, or they can choose not to, and they can choose to do it in a timely manner, and they can choose to like never do it. So it's beyond disgusting, and it's really hard. So back in 2020, in 2019, technically, I did research, and everybody's told me that Sweden was the most accessible country in the whole world. And I'm like, if I want to make this a reality and make the North Shore more accessible in however I can share my story to help other people in leadership and in power, make that happen, why not go to Sweden? Because, right, that's where a lot of our descendants came from. That's where my family heritage came from, and a lot of their climate is the same. So maybe there's something in Sweden that they're doing that we in America can be doing to make the North Shore even more amazing and accessible and inclusive than it currently is. And then I had plans to go to 4 different places within the United States as well. And again, never being somebody that has flown, that was a huge step in making those plans and wanting to go to the birthplace of 504 and IEPs and ADA, and going to wheel the same sidewalks and be in the same buildings that people like Ed Roberts and Judith Heumann and all of those people that have paved the way for someone like me to live an amazing life here as an American. And yet how much more work there is still to do for that. So anyways, it was really hard to break down those barriers in my mind to then make those plans. And then the pandemic hit. And as somebody who has an immunocompromising disease, as well as immunocompromising medications, life just completely changed as I knew it. And so some of the other fellows chose to defer part of their fellowship for later, because like everything, we, just worked at how do we punt with what we've been given, and how do we make the most out of what we have. So some of the fellows were able to do some of their travels, but for me, that wasn't the case. So as much as I could, I used that fellowship to give me the skills and abilities to live independently at home as long as I can. So I was able to buy some medical equipment, some exercise equipment, different things that are going to make me a better leader. So the cool thing about the fellowship is that it's all about you. How do you need to take care of yourself? How do you need to become a better leader? Maybe it's going for your master's, maybe it's going for a PhD, maybe it's setting your own plan like I did. So I did 6 different eCornell certificates. I have them above my desk here. That's why I looked up, sorry. But things anywhere from social media to hospitality and hotel management, because those are things that are huge here on the shore and things that I want to understand how those different businesses work, so I can come alongside and help make that more accessible and helpful and inclusive for people when they travel. And then I did a lot of women in leadership and other types of leadership certifications. And I grew a lot. I got to be connected to people all over the world working on these certifications. I made connections with other people, other big leaders, talking with some of Judith Heuman's people. Yeah, so anything that I could do through Zoom, like we are tonight, is what I took advantage of. And I got different equipment to help out with that, like a GoPro. So when I'm out on the trails and having fun with friends and family, I can be also using that as an advocacy tool. So that way other people can say, hey, well, if Jenna's been there, I bet I can go there. Or, hey, I can get a hold of Jenna and ask about this because my disability is a little different than hers, or what have you. So anyways, I just really encourage people to look at the Bush Fellowship. And like I said, like my mentors told me, even if you aren't selected as a fellow, just going through those steps and answering those questions, it's life-changing. So that leads to representation matters. And so as part of the fellowship, not only finding locations that are accessible and tell a story that's similar to mine, and maybe stories that have nothing really similar to me, but are intriguing and cause me to have curiosity and cause me to ponder, what does life look like from a life that I may have shared experience with, or maybe I don't. And so working with Madeline down here in Two Harbors, it's just been a breath of fresh air to work with both her and Shannon to figure out, like, hey, there is like tons of books out there, which I should have known as somebody that wheels through the Barnes and Noble from time to time or does a lot of Amazon shopping. But until you can really deep dive into books that are out there, it is just amazing. So probably back in the early 2000s, there was a book called Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. And I think it was recommended to me by a fellow teacher. And it was amazing because this is the first novel that I had ever read that had a main character that was a wheelchair user like myself. So that was our similarities. What our differences were is that Melody has cerebral palsy, which I have arthritis, so they're different. She is nonverbal, which I am not, so there's another difference. But the shared experiences, and I don't want to give the book away because if you haven't read it, this is a total must. So that's your first assignment tonight. The teacher in me is still alive. But it's a total must because in the book, her mom is taking her into a restaurant and they pull up to the restaurant and there's stairs. And the waiter, maitre d', whoever comes out and does the whole like, oh. And the kicker is that she's there for a school event. So she needs to get there. She needs to be a part of her team. She needs to be in that space. And so, oh, well, ma'am, you can come to the back door. I've been through many back doors, many side doors, many other doors. But wouldn't you know, the elevator was broke. And the elevator or lift had been broke for quite a while. But, you know, they love to say that, oh, it just happened today. So sorry. And so anyways, in the way that the author describes it, her mom has to bump her up every single stair to get up to the restaurant to be with her peers. And I could literally feel every tug of my chair because that was my lived experience with my family and with my friends. And so the coolest part about this book was that the Melody, the main character, also has a name Melody, so that's pretty musical, right? But she also has synesthesia, which is when you hear music, you can smell smells or you can see colors. And so ding, 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 this was a great way for me to introduce this book into my classroom. For several years, our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in the schools that I taught at got to hear this book and be read it by someone who represents that culture, disability culture, and more specifically, mobility disability culture. And so I was connected with a good friend. One of my physical therapists has been a great friend through since my middle school days. And one of her former patients, her name is Lydia, and she has almost all the same things that Melody has, except for the synesthesia. But we got together via Zoom. That was before pandemic, before this was all an everyday thing. So my students thought it was the coolest thing that we got to talk to somebody just like Melody, who had to use an iPad to talk with us. And yeah, so it was just great. So again, your assignment is to read Out of My Mind. And then like 2 years ago, she came out with Out of My Heart. So now Melody isn't in late elementary school. Now she's like middle school and she goes to summer camp. And that's all I'm going to say with a cliffhanger. So got to read those two. So working with the Bush Foundation and having this money to invest in myself, I was able to find Judith Heuman's new books. And so these are her memoirs. The one on the left is her adult version, and the Rolling Warrior on the right is her youth novel. And of course, I bought both because I'm like, hey, I want to be able to recommend this to adults and to kids. And I learned a ton. I can't even say how much reading all of the things that Judith and her team that did the sit-in in a federal building in order to get the ADA and 504 to pass, and neglecting their human needs and neglecting their medical needs. Getting connected with a biker group. I can't remember exactly which one, but them bringing food to them because they were trying to lock them out and keep them from getting their medications, from getting food. They were trying to stop the whole sit-in. I mean, it's an amazing read. And to think about how much life has changed and how much we owe to these amazing people that have fought the fight. And yet they're still inspiring each of us to do our part in fighting that fight still today. And then I chose some other books. So Let's Explore with Core is a picture book. And this is by Curve Free with Corey Lee. And so if you haven't heard of him, I highly suggest following him. He has a blog. He's all over Facebook and Instagram. He is a power chair user who has SMA. I can't remember exactly what that means, but so from birth, he's been in a wheelchair since I believe it was about 9 years old. And he has been to all 7 continents. He's a 33-year-old male who, with the help of his mom and other PCAs and caregivers, I mean, he is just all over. Like watching his pictures of him in Antarctica, seeing videos of him all over the world is just absolutely amazing. Like right now he's hopping on the Disney Wish cruise line. And this is like his, I don't know, he loves cruises as well. So this is like his 12th or 18th or something cruise. But I love it because, again, the Jenna that read about Melody and Out of My Mind had a book like Let's Explore with Core been around when I was newly in a wheelchair or newly disabled or even later in life. How amazing is that? But I didn't know that. So I never got to think bigger or dream bigger or think differently because that information wasn't out there. Another book that I enjoy is Air, and it's all about a teenage girl who is in a wheelchair for whatever reason, and her dad was a big skateboarder, and so he had dilapidated parts of a ramp in their back, and her and a good friend go through all of these different struggles, her as a wheelchair user helping her non-disabled friend, as well as her non-disabled friend helping her in life. And just the way that Monica Rowe writes in it, like I can feel catching air on my tires, even though I've never and probably never will be in a skateboard park in my chair. Just the way that they write, you can feel it all. And so those were mobility disability books. But in this grant, thankfully from Co-op Light and Power that we were able to buy, I don't even remember the number of books, but they went not only to the Two Harbors Public Library, but also to Silver Bay Public Library, and then also all 3 schools. So William Kelly, Two Harbors High School, and Minnehaha. And they're all within the Arrowhead Public Library system. So our whole area benefits from this grant. So thank you to Co-op Light and Power again. And so this book, The Words in My Hands, is actually a deaf middle school, high school age girl. And she was not raised in deaf culture or in disability culture. And it takes place in Australia. And so learning the differences of both of those cultures, of learning of the hardship and the differences from American culture to Australian culture, as well as it's kind of set in the future, but about food and environmental impact and how we live life and governmental things and different policies. And her mom works on one side of it, but she is kind of fighting it as a typical teenager, as well as just like figuring out who she is. So, and it's an amazing read. It is thicker paper. So like in this whole journey of finding representation matters, I myself have been taught a lot about like, wow, I never thought about like how a weight of a book helps with sensory things, how the weight of a page can help with sensory, how artistic and creative, like this book is just amazing just to look through it because she was a visual artist as well. So she captured all of her life in these pages. And so it's just like an art experience at the same time that you're reading her story. So highly recommend that. And Sunnyside Plaza is a great book about individuals with intellectual disabilities who all live together and they run a restaurant in the basement of their house. And there's a murder. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So it's very cool. Represents so much of what I have seen in the classroom and living life with my kiddos that just inspired me to do adaptive music and just, yeah, are amazing. And Haben is a deaf-blind woman who conquered Harvard Law. And so reading her book and her memoir was very inspiring. And again, something that isn't in my wheelhouse of my everyday life, but just an amazing entrance for me through a book into what life is like and similar and different obstacles that people overcome as they go through life. And these last 2 that I chose, I'm not quite sure fully the audience that we are with tonight or as the recording is shared, but Sylvia Longmire is a great social media person to follow. She is a former military analyst, and she retired due to MS. And so now she's a power chair user. And her book that I love the most is What Happened to You. Talks about how people should engage with people. And maybe that the first question out of your mouth when interacting with somebody in a wheelchair is not, hey, what happened to you? But it's a memoir of her solo wheelchair adventure. So kind of like Corey, Sylvia has been everywhere doing everything from cruises to lots of different continents, many different countries. She's great to follow on social media. She loves music. She's a great singer. And so that's a great book if you happen to find yourself in a space where maybe disability is newer to you, that, you know, you can still travel, you can still do all these things. And here's some great tips of how it works for her. And then last down at the bottom right is Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. And she is just amazing. And so if you're not quite sure of like, what is the current language, what are the current labels, what are the things that I can do to be a better ally if I happen to not find myself within disability culture, but I want to be an ally. And full disclosure, I'm just starting this book. It's been on my shelf for a little while. But Emily just found herself flying, I think it was like in the last month, and her chair too got totally demolished. And so you'll see more and more of her story and her life being out there as an activist, because she is already winning tons of awards with her book and just with her speaking engagements, and just her as an overall person. She's just amazing to listen to and to follow. So Yeah. So thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to your questions. And there's the ways of contacting me. And also at the bottom right, you see the new logo for my upcoming nonprofit and social media world that's kind of in the hopper for soon, hopefully by summer, as well as my own memoir coming out, hopefully in July of this year. So you're the first to hear that. Only select people know that. So this is the first official, get it to the printer, Udenberg. So.
Jenna, thank you so much for sharing your stories. And we can open it up to questions now.
I just want to say hi, Jenna.
Hi, Melissa. I thought that was you down there. I'm like, hey, yes.
It's me. No, I really admire all your work, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for being a part of it and working with the Northshore Guide and all that too. Good stuff.
Yeah. So Jenna and I published the Northshore Explorer Guide, and I have a blog and social media. So I saw in the newspaper way back in the day when you first got the Bush Fellowship, I saw in the North Shore Journal that you had gotten, so we didn't know each other, but I just thought, through my blog and through everything, like what a great person to partner with to kind of help spread the word about accessibility and to tell visitors, like, here's where you can go, because we get visitors that come here and they just don't know where to go and stuff. So I think so Jenna and I worked together on a blog article about where to go. And so we have one published about accessible waterfalls on the North Shore. And then we kind of have another one that's kind of in the works that has more detailed information about the whole North Shore, but that was a little bit too big of a project.
We'll get there.
But it's still there. It's in the works, but we did get the waterfall one published.
Jenna?
Yes.
I really enjoyed the presentation. I appreciate what you're trying to do. One of the issues with the North Shore is not just the buildings, but it's also the physical environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with a group that's involved with the Tettagooch, Friends of Tettagooch, and we're trying to address that. That's a difficult part for accessibility because it doesn't have many flat surfaces. a lot of mountainy areas and steep areas. However, we are developing a natural play area at Tettagooch up near the High Falls parking lot, just off of that parking lot, that will have accessible elements, wheelchair accessible elements in it. And we've spent last summer, and we still have a little more work to do on this part of it, but we just spent last summer moving a great deal of class 2 gravel into the area for the path and for a play area. And we just have to install it, a play table that's elevated, that is wheelchair accessible, and we'll have a picnic table that's handicap accessible. And there'll be some other smaller elements that a weaving element that's handicap accessible. These are all, it's a very natural environment. It's not, there's no built up equipment or anything like that. It's not all accessible. If you're in a wheelchair, I'm sorry, you won't be able to climb a tree, but you might be able to build a stick fort and play with the blocks and the different things that are out there. Anyway, when we have the opening next summer and the fall, I think it's important to make sure we invite you to come and take a look at and get feedback.
Absolutely. And if you need to get a hold of me, and if you have questions in between and setting things up or other ways of inclusion, kind of like my work with Melissa, the biggest thing is just that we promote what we have. So often and we're getting better as a culture and a society, but so often it's been, well, we built it and they didn't come.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore we're not going to spend that money in a new way because we're not going to build anything else because they didn't come. And even when I'm working with state agencies and federal agencies, it's like, but did you promote it? And then did you promote it in an accessible way that people can get to it? Because disability culture is our largest minority in the world, let alone in the United States. 24% of our population is disabled and identify as disabled. And there is nothing that keeps anyone in this call or anyone that's listening to this from entering my culture at any point. It's the most diverse culture that exists, and we're always welcoming, and and we want to make sure we're inclusive within all of those demographics. So not just thinking about mobility disabilities, but hearing disabilities and sight disabilities and all of the different categories, sensory. And I love Chattahoochee Morris. So even when I talk with Kurt, it's like, I know that there's natural things, but that's my favorite state park on the shore to go to, because you have the boardwalk and you have like the most accessible picnic tables. Like I was counting the last time I was up there, and I'm like, oh my lands, how did I not ever notice that you have like the little kid one and you have the adult ones, and they're like all over, and you have 2 different bathroom options, and you have, so Chattahoochee has a ton to offer that's already accessible. And so it's just a promoting of that. And so I guess I would just say, don't always feel like you need to apologize for that, because we understand that, some of the things can't, but then promote the bejeebies out of the things that we can do and that we can see and that we are welcome to and to be a part of.
Well, I'm glad you're so familiar with the park, because we're trying to make inroads, and it takes time, but we're a step at a time.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I am trying to work at the next level of like funding and stuff, because I did attend one of the state commissioners open houses. And so then as they're explaining like how state parks get their different funding and whatever, I was like, wait a minute. I know I'm a music teacher that likes to count to 4 and sometimes 12, but that never gets our rural state parks where they need to be. And then they're like, oh, we didn't mean, and then I'm like, no, that's what you meant, and that's what you figure out your equation. So let's come back to that, because we have Gooseberry and we've got Chattahoochee and we've got so many more on the shore. That's my summer goal, is to go see all of our state parks on the shore and experience what I can experience from my chair, and highlight what we can do.
I have one other question. Is there if we wanted to do some outreach to the physically handicapped community, is there a way to do that other than the standard ways of just broadcasting to the public? Is there any targeted avenues? I guess is the question.
Yeah, it's a great.
But for example, we had an event out there 2 Saturdays ago, or upcoming, and we drew almost 300 people, and there was elements of that, most of which would have been quite accessible. There wasn't a single family with kids out there, or adult for that matter, that had a disability, mobility disability, that would have prevented. They would have all been able to participate in most of the elements that day, and yet we didn't. And we advertised it very broadly through the standard mechanisms of, the papers, the flyers, the social media, but we didn't. I don't think people see us as a potential for that kind of activity. And if there was a way to target, maybe that's a conversation for the future, but it just seems to me that it would have been, we had s'mores, we have a big fireplace out there. We had s'mores at the fireplace. It's all accessible. That whole building is basically, and the patio is accessible. It'd have been great. They could have made pine cone bird feeders with pine cones and peanut butter and birdseed, and they could have listened to the story time and participated in that, and those kinds of things. We had tons of younger kids, and these are older pre and early elementary, tons of kids. So that's kind of the question. I'm not expecting you to have an answer off the top, because maybe there isn't one, but I think it's a conversation that we could have.
Yeah, I guess kind of my knee-jerk answer is, how can we partner together so that way all areas of inclusion are always there? And so I guess like thinking of the entities as far as like you could share it out with the local schools. You could make sure that all of the special education teachers have those flyers. Like a lot of things, if you look down at like the Duluth Children's Theater and the Duluth Playhouse, like if they have sensory specific performances, like they promote that in addition and in those same fields, but then they also go above and beyond into that next way of getting there. I would say any of your outdoor stuff, I would make sure that you're in partnership with Courage Kenny, which is the adaptive sports group down in Duluth, and they go all the way to the Canadian border, all the way down to like the Moose Lake, Forest Lake area is their coverage and service area. So I think getting a partnership with them, that they would promote your activities that are more accessible.
Is that group affiliated with the former Kinney Rehab in Minneapolis?
Yeah, they're all connected. So it used to be
okay.
Courage Duluth and now Courage
Yeah.
Kenny.
I
kind of
had
combined.
a social work internship there in 1967. When it was Kinney Rehab. It was right after polio, and they were into the disabilities area. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say with them, I would say Access North down in Duluth. And that's the hardest part when I work with other disability advocates is we are such a diverse minority that finding everyone, and even though like the web and all of that we think is like everybody has it, it's not really true that everybody has it. So I'm glad that you're still doing, you know, the typical newspapers and postings out, but also I think it just shows inclusion if you throw, sorry, I call him the handyman, but if you throw the accessible insignia or icon on there, and I forgot to share that when I did my presentation, so let me share my screen one last time. So when you're looking at putting things out there, you can tell in my logo that I use this newer one. Back when I talked about the, oh, 1 second, go to where I need to go here. There we go. Sorry. Why isn't it doing what I want it to do? There we go. When I was on this slide, you can see that there's the two different ones. So in disability culture, by and large, we are moving to more of this action-based icon.
Got it.
Some people don't necessarily like the action one because they're like, I don't identify with that because I can't move on my own. So there is a difference within culture, but even if you show both of them, like this icon I found for the presentation, that would just give an idea. And then anybody that needs ASL or other accommodations as well, just making sure that things are promoted so they can call and request accommodations, even if it's something you know that you maybe can't, but it's something that you can in the future. So I guess that's where I would start. But like we have said, other disability advocates say the same thing. It's hard because you don't all have that clearinghouse of, hi, here's your disability card, and now you're in this special group, and here's how we get a hold of everyone. And in some ways, people also don't want to identify as disabled. And so because there's a stigma, because our society has said that disability is a bad word, and it's not. So we're trying to take that out of our vocabulary, because disability is not a bad word. It is something that we all will experience at some level in our lives. So let's take away that stigma and let's make our world just inclusive.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I look forward to hearing from you, Morris, how I can help out more.
I'm going to pass on some information to the board.
Perfect.
Other questions?
Jenna, what can you tell us about your plans for your new nonprofit?
Thanks, Jen. So with my nonprofit, I am looking to increase education and training. I am encouraging that it's all about partnerships and it's coming alongside and working with you, hence being above and beyond. And I get above and beyond because so many times when we come into businesses and agencies and organizations, but we're up to code. Well, we're a new building, so therefore we're accessible. We're 100% accessible. No, you're not, because there are more disabilities than ADA can cover. So my hope is that we will help shift that mindset of, but we're up to code, because code is over 40 years old and it is not up to the current needs. And we have new medical breakthroughs every single day where people are living longer and living differently than we ever have in human existence. So how do we make these physical spaces accessible? And so often, and I never really thought about this until my Bush Fellowship, but it's not my medical condition that disables me. It's the environments in which I'm put in that disable me. So I'm fully me, I'm fully capable. But if I'm put in a space that I can't function or it's not safe for me, then I'm disabled. So I'm hoping to spread that change, getting back to Jen's question. I'm hoping to work with other foundations, because it seems like so often small businesses and other entities can't get grants to help with that, because the ADA is the most unfunded federal mandate that there is. So I want to break down that barrier using my connections of my Bush Fellowship and other leadership opportunities and different partnerships to say, hey, let's work together. Let's make this kind of a clearinghouse of grant situations where small businesses can come and say, hey, I need help covering making my parking area actually not just compliant, but usable in winter, spring, summer, and fall. So I'm getting rid of my gravel and I'm getting pavement, and I'm needing help for all the signage and the actual asphalt and for the painting and the striping, and giving up a parking spot so we can have an access aisle so people can enter our business at all levels safely. I would love to see other people besides just people on my board, but other allies coming alongside too and sharing that, and other people eventually becoming hired to be advocates and to, be in this work, because it takes all of us from all of our different lived experiences to make this a reality. So I really see the prongs of advocacy, of education, and of training. And then also it's dealing with the attitudinal barriers, right? So coming in and sharing with all of our customer service, because that's what our whole Northshore is, right? It's all about tourism. It's all about people coming back. And the biggest thing for me when I travel is I am loyal, and I am loyal to a fault when hotels and restaurants and coffee places and other things go above and beyond, and they're just amazing human beings because they come and move a chair at a table, or they come and hold the door open, or they ask first before making an accommodation that I may or may not want. So that training and education piece is a huge heart and passion for me.
I was just gonna say, that sounds great, Jenna. Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So just recently I've seen advertised, and I haven't had time to dig around, the Disability Hub and MN. Have you seen that website? Have you had a chance to look around? Does that seem like it's going to be useful? I just know like the state has put out several, like Help Me Connect, different websites to help different communities, families, whatever, find the resources they need. And I'm just looking at this one, and this one looks so different than the others I've seen. So I'm just curious about what you know about it, or if you've had any experience with it so far.
Yeah, so kind of funny. I just had lunch with a friend, and she's one of their new employees. And I am connected to another person who used to work for them and with them. And so I think it's amazing. I think I've gone to one or two of their webinars. And then they were also looking at partnering with a group that I'm working with through the cities that's working on disability justice, which is a whole nother topic and realm within disability culture. But So I think they're doing amazing work. I think it's going to be something that can bring us all together, and kind of bringing both these questions back together with Morris's question from earlier too. I think that's the hardest part, is we're so separated. And like I said earlier in my presentation, it's like when your medical stuff becomes so important, it's so hard to keep advocating and being out there. And so often it's like we get together and we're super fired up and we've got all these supports and we've got all these partnerships, and then life happens and things fall to the wayside. And so I think Disability Hub has potential to be totally an amazing thing. And I think it's already doing amazing work. I just don't have enough personal experience yet with it to be like, yay, but I'm expecting great things. So I'm hoping they live up to that.
And is the state doing it, or who is backing this?
I don't know. I
I'm
know
just
they're
looking at
housed-
it. It doesn't really, it's not like branded like Minnesota, like the state of Minnesota. So I'm just
Right.
trying to figure it out. Anyways,
I think they're a new version of something that used to exist, but I could be wrong in that. But I know that they're housed at the main U.
oh,
And I know that they have a very large inclusive space, because I've gotten to see that through Zoom. And different technologies that are super awesome in inclusion for virtual experiences as well. So, and seems to be great ladies in leadership that are working there too. So.
Well, Jenna, as I look at the time, I think maybe we'll wrap up. I have one last question for you, if we can. I loved how you shared like your story, but also when you shared the books, you shared one way we can become a better ally by like educating ourselves about perspectives from people who are different than us. And so would you be willing to share one or two more other thoughts about being an ally for folks that are on the call?
Great question. Well, first of all, with Marvel in the chat, you can find all of these books at your local library. So
Sure, we have them.
there you go. You have them. And if you find more Marvel that we need to write a grant for, I'm totally on it. So share away and I will see what we can do. Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is that I have experienced in the last little bit personally would be, even if you're like a loved one or a close friend of people that are disabled, or a spouse or what have you, like that's great. And you're like the closest thing that can be in there, but you're not in there because you have your own lived experience. So even like, I'm choosing my words carefully because I know this is going on the internet. So even when loved ones say, yeah, I get it, I kind of have to go, no, you don't, because you're not dealing with the pain. You're not dealing with the lack of function. You're not dealing with the lack of strength. You're not dealing with the emotions that go along with it. You're dealing with your emotions and your feelings for that loved one or that person in your life or whatever. But I guess always just remembering that next step, like, yep, this is my feelings and these are how I feel. But maybe I need to ask some authentic and careful, curious questions of my loved one to get even closer to what their lived experience can be like. And again, knowing how comfortable they are with their disability or where they're at in their grieving process or their acceptance process. It's just all a different kind of walk. And I guess the other thing is too, I'll admit we're a confusing bunch. All of humanity is a confusing bunch. But when you're in a place where you need to ask for help, it can be really hard because like in the morning with my arthritis, I might need help. But that also doesn't give carte blanche in the afternoon once the meds have kicked in and my body's moving, that I want you to just grab my chair and push me. Like there always has to be those questions of asking, because our disabilities, our pain levels, our whatever impediment or things that we need help with, it can change at any moment. So it's always just about asking those questions and developing that relationship. And I think it's just always having that support system. Like I wouldn't be where I am today without all of my family and friend support and community support and the group of 26 Blandin family. Like we all need each other. We're all interconnected and we all can move forward and we can all do better when we know better. And once we know better, we need to do better. So That's what I'm just learning. Like, I can't speak for all wheelie kind. I have to explain
Yes.
when I say wheelie, like I use that to define myself. That's a label I use, and that's a label that other people in culture can use as a fellow wheelchair user. But I get tired of saying user because that sounds weird. So I'd rather be a wheelie. So I think it's just asking the questions, having the respect, and always circling back, because things change, and we have different experiences and different wisdom that we gain along the way.
Thank you, Jenna. That's great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you, Jenna, again. So glad that you were with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for coming, friends.
All right. Thank you.